The biggest flying animal to ever exist wasn't a dinosaur. The biggest flying animal to ever exist had a wingspan longer than a school bus. It could look a giraffe directly in the eye while standing on the ground, and most people have never even heard its name. You've probably seen it in a museum, in a documentary, maybe even in a movie, and been told it was a dinosaur. It wasn't, not even close. And once you understand what it actually was, the real story is stranger than the myth. Let's start with the mistake, because almost everyone makes it. When people picture flying dinosaurs, they picture something like a pterodactyl, wings out, swooping over a Cretaceous jungle next to a T-Rex. That image is everywhere. It's in toy aisles, cartoons, museum gift shops, and it's wrong. Pterosaurs, the group this creature belonged to, were not dinosaurs. They were reptiles, yes. They lived at the same time as dinosaurs, yes, but dinosaurs are defined by a very specific hip and leg structure, one that let them stand with their legs directly underneath their bodies. Pterosaurs didn't have that. They were a completely separate branch of the reptile family tree, one that evolved flight through an entirely different design. Dinosaurs ruled the ground. Pterosaurs ruled the sky. Two different empires existing side by side. So what was this thing actually called? Quetzalcoatlus, named after Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god of Aztec mythology. And once you see why, the name makes sense. This wasn't just a big flying reptile. It was something that looked like it belonged in a myth. Let's talk about size, because the numbers here are almost hard to believe. Quetzalcoatlus had a wingspan estimated between 33 and 36 feet. For comparison, a school bus is about 40 feet long. This animal could nearly stretch from one end of a bus to the other, using nothing but its wings. Standing on the ground, it stood roughly 16 to 18 feet tall at the shoulder, on all fours, tall enough to look into a second-story window. Its head alone was about 8 to 10 feet long, nearly the length of an entire adult human lying down. And despite all of that, scientists estimate it weighed somewhere between 200 and 500 pounds. An animal the size of a small airplane, weighing about as much as a large lion. That number should stop you for a second. How does something that big weigh that little? This is where the real engineering begins. Quetzalcoatlus, like other pterosaurs, had bones that were almost entirely hollow, reinforced internally with thin, bony struts, similar in concept to the internal trusses inside an airplane wing. Some of its bones had walls thinner than a credit card, yet were strong enough to support the stress of flight. Birds today use a similar trick, hollow bones filled with air sacs, which is part of why a bird can be so large and still fly. But Quetzalcoatlus took that design to an extreme. Birds have never matched. Nothing alive today, no bird, no bat, comes anywhere close to this size and still gets off the ground. Which raises the obvious question, how does something this big actually take off? For decades, this was one of the biggest unsolved problems in paleontology. Most flying animals launch the way birds do, a powerful push from the legs alone. But the math didn't work for Quetzalcoatlus. Its leg muscles, based on bone structure, simply weren't strong enough to launch 500 pounds into the air by themselves. For years, some scientists genuinely wondered if this animal could fly at all, or if it was simply too big, a creature stuck on the ground despite having wings. Then, in 2010, paleontologist Michael Habib proposed something that changed the entire picture. He suggested that pterosaurs, like Quetzalcoatlus, didn't launch like birds. They launched like something closer to a pole vaulter. Using all four limbs, the animal would plant its powerful front arms into the ground and explosively push off, vaulting its entire body upward in a fraction of a second. Using the same folded wing arms, it would then unfurl into flight. This is called a quadrupedal launch, and the numbers work. That single vaulting motion could generate enough force to launch an animal this size several feet into the air instantly, just enough for its wings to catch air and take over.
Once airborne, Quetzalcoatlus likely wasn't a flapping, energetic flyer like a sparrow. Its size and wing shape suggest it was built more like a modern soaring bird, an albatross or a condor, riding thermals and air currents for long stretches with minimal effort, conserving energy across huge distances. Some estimates suggest it could have covered hundreds of miles in a single flight, cruising at altitude, barely needing to flap at all.
Now here's where it gets even stranger, because for a long time, scientists weren't even sure how this thing hunted or what it actually ate. Quetzalcoatlus had no teeth. Its jaws formed a long, pointed beak, similar in concept to a modern stork or heron, but massively scaled up. For years, the leading theory was that it was a fish eater, swooping low over ancient rivers and lakes, snatching prey from the water the way a heron does today. But more recent research has complicated that picture. Quetzalcoatlus fossils have been found far inland, in what would have been dry floodplain environments, not directly beside major bodies of water. That's led some researchers to a different theory entirely, that Quetzalcoatlus was more like a modern stork or ground hornbill, walking across land on those long limbs, picking off small animals, insects, even baby dinosaurs, straight off the ground with quick, precise strikes of its enormous beak. Think about that for a second. A land-walking hunter the size of a giraffe, capable of launching itself into the sky the instant it needed to. Not purely a flying predator, not purely a ground predator, something that could dominate both. And it wasn't the only giant pterosaur roaming the skies of the late Cretaceous. Quetzalcoatlus belonged to a family called Azhdarchids, and while it was the largest known member, close relatives like Hatzegopteryx, discovered in modern-day Romania, reached similarly massive sizes. In some regions, these giant pterosaurs may have filled the role that large land predators fill today, walking, stalking, striking, with the added advantage of simply flying away from any danger. So if this thing was so dominant, so well-engineered, so successful, what happened to it? The same thing that happened to almost everything else 66 million years ago. The asteroid impact at Chicxulub didn't just end the age of dinosaurs, it ended the age of pterosaurs too. The same chain reaction, wildfire, then darkness, then a collapse of plant life, then a collapse of everything that depended on plants, wiped out every non-avian dinosaur and every pterosaur on the planet, Quetzalcoatlus included. An animal engineered by tens of millions of years of evolution, capable of soaring hundreds of miles on a single flight, gone within the same catastrophic stretch of time that ended everything else. Here's what's strange, though. Pterosaurs as a whole had already been surviving and adapting for over 150 million years before that day. They had already outlasted multiple extinction events, environmental shifts, and rival predators. It wasn't a design flaw that ended them. It was the same thing that ended the dinosaurs, a threat from completely outside the system, one that no amount of evolutionary refinement could have prepared them for. And unlike dinosaurs, pterosaurs left no direct descendants. Birds evolved from small feathered dinosaurs, a separate branch entirely. When the last pterosaur died, that entire 150 million year lineage, hollow bones, quadrupedal launch, soaring flight and all, ended completely. There is nothing alive today that flies the way Quetzalcoatlus flew. nothing that launches the way it launched. It wasn't just a species that went extinct. It was an entire method of existing in the sky that has never been repeated since. To put its size in perspective one more time, because it's genuinely hard to hold in your head, the largest flying bird alive today, the wandering albatross, has a wingspan of around 11 feet. Quetzalcoatlus had a wingspan 3 times that. If you stood next to it on the ground with its wings folded, it would already tower over you before it ever left the ground. And when it did leave the ground, it did so by vaulting its entire body weight upward, using nothing but its arms, in less time than it takes you to blink. So the next time someone shows you a flying dinosaur in a movie or a toy or a cartoon, you'll know the truth. Dinosaurs never conquered the sky. Something else did. Something built on a completely different blueprint. Something so large and so strange that for decades, scientists weren't even sure it should have been able to fly at all. And for over 150 million years, it did anyway, riding air currents across an ancient world, until one ordinary day ended it, along with almost everything else.